Hello, friends. If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments.
I was eating leftover pizza and trying to pretend my bank statement wasn't real when my phone rang Tuesday night. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but figured it might be about one of the job applications I'd been firing off into the void. Mason Newman? The voice was formal, professional, lawyer-sounding. Yeah, that's me. This is Stevie Jimenez. I'm an attorney handling the estate of Sage Vega. I believe she was your aunt? I had to think about that one for a second. Aunt Sage. I remembered her from maybe 2 family gatherings when I was a kid. Quiet woman who wore flannel shirts and smelled like wood smoke. Always sat apart from everyone else. Didn't say much. Right, yeah, she was my dad's sister. Is she okay? I'm sorry to tell you she passed away last month. She'd been in a nursing home in Albany for the past year. I set down my pizza slice. Oh, I didn't know. That was the truth. Dad died 5 years ago, and we'd lost touch with most of his family after that. Mom wasn't big on maintaining those connections, and honestly, neither was I. Too much work, too much awkward small talk at holiday dinners. She named you as her sole beneficiary, Jimenez said. You've inherited her property. What kind of property? A cabin and 40 acres in the Adirondacks, near a place called Bear Lake. I grabbed a pen and started scribbling on a napkin. What's it worth? Hard to say without an appraisal. The cabin's been vacant for over a year, and it's fairly remote. But lakefront property in that area typically runs anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000, depending on condition and access. My student loan balance flashed in my head. $87,000, the number that kept me awake most nights. I'll need to see it, I said. Of course, I can email you the address and directions. Fair warning, it's quite isolated. No cell service for the last 10 miles. We talked through some paperwork details, and he promised to send everything over. After I hung up, I sat there staring at the napkin with Bear Lake, 40 acres, lakefront, written in my terrible handwriting. I'd never owned anything worth more than my beat-up Honda. Now I might own enough land to wipe out my debt and maybe have something left over. That was Wednesday. By Friday morning, I was driving north with a full tank of gas and a cooler full of gas station sandwiches. The October air was crisp and clean once I got out of the city. Real autumn weather, the kind that makes you want to buy flannel shirts and drink coffee outside. I'd always liked fall better than summer anyway. Less pressure to be happy about everything. The GPS took me off the interstate and onto state routes that got narrower and emptier as I drove. 2-lane highways became winding county roads, which became dirt roads with grass growing down the middle. The kind of roads that made you wonder if you'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. I passed maybe 3 houses in the last hour of driving. All of them looked like they'd been there since the 50s, with metal roofs and wood piles stacked against the sides. Dogs in the yards that watched my car go by but didn't bother barking. The final turn was onto something called Timber Creek Road, which wasn't really a road so much as 2 tire tracks, with a gravel strip between them. My Honda scraped bottom twice on the deeper ruts, but I kept going. According to Jimenez's directions, I was close. I smelled the lake before I saw it. That clean, cold water smell mixed with pine needles and wood smoke from somebody's chimney. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. Bear Lake stretched out like a mirror, maybe half a mile across. The far shore was nothing but forest climbing up into hills that disappeared into low clouds. No houses visible anywhere. No boats, just water and trees, and the sound of my engine echoing off the hills. The cabin sat about 50 yards back from the water's edge, tucked between 2 massive pine trees. It was bigger than I'd expected. 2 stories with a stone chimney and a wraparound porch that sagged on one end like someone had forgotten to replace a support beam. Most of the windows were boarded up with plywood that had gone gray from weather. The front door was solid wood, painted green about 10 years ago by the look of it. A metal roof that seemed newer than the rest of the place. I parked next to what used to be a garden but was now just weeds and the skeleton of a fence that deer had probably been jumping for years. The key was under a flower pot by the front steps, exactly where Jimenez said it would be. Old brass key that looked like it belonged to a different century. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty house. The smell hit me immediately, dust and stale air and something else I couldn't place. Not unpleasant, just old, like opening a book that's been sitting on a shelf for decades. I found the light switch and flicked it. Nothing. Right. Jimenez had mentioned the power was shut off. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The main room was bigger than my entire apartment back home. Hardwood floors under about an inch of dust. Stone fireplace that looked like it could heat the whole house. Kitchen along one wall with appliances that were probably older than me but looked like they'd run forever if you plugged them in. But it was the walls that made me stop and stare. Mounted deer heads everywhere. 8, maybe 10 of them, all with impressive antlers. A black bear's head over the fireplace, mouth open like it was about to say something. Dozens of framed photographs covering every available wall space. I moved closer to look at the pictures. All hunting photos. Sage with various people in camouflage gear, standing over dead deer, holding up strings of fish, posing with rifles. The photos spanned what looked like 40 years or more. Sage aging from a young woman in her 30s to the gray-haired person I remembered from family dinners. She looked happy in most of them. Really happy, in a way I'd never seen during those brief family visits. Like this place was where she actually lived, and everything else was just time she had to spend somewhere else. I spent the weekend going through everything. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, all with more hunting photos and gear. Boxes of ammunition in the closets. Rifles and gun safes I couldn't open without the combinations. Fishing rods and tackle boxes and waders hanging in what used to be a coat closet. The basement was more of the same. Freezer full of venison that had gone bad months ago. Shelves lined with canned vegetables and preserves, most of them dating back years. I made lists on my phone. The guns alone were probably worth $20,000, assuming they were legal and registered. The mounted heads would sell to the right collector. The furniture was solid wood, handmade stuff that antique dealers would fight over. The cabin itself needed work, but nothing major. New windows to replace the boarded ones. Some porch repairs, fresh paint, maybe $15,000 in improvements, and it would show like something out of a magazine. By Sunday afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with a calculator and a legal pad, adding up numbers that made my chest feel lighter than it had in years. Even being conservative about everything, the place would sell for at least $300,000. Maybe more to the right buyer who wanted genuine isolation and didn't mind the drive. After paying off my loans and covering the improvements, I'd still have enough left over to put a down payment on something of my own. Maybe even enough to quit the temp jobs and finish my degree without working nights at the call center. I locked up the cabin and drove back toward civilization with the radio playing 80s rock and the windows down, breathing air that didn't smell like exhaust and other people's cooking. For the first time in months, I felt like things might actually work out. I slept like garbage that first night. The scratching started around midnight, soft at first, like fingernails on drywall. I figured mice had gotten into the insulation while Sage was gone. Made sense. Old cabin, empty for months. Probably a buffet for rodents. But the sound kept moving. Started in the kitchen wall, then shifted toward the living room, then upstairs. Like something was following a path inside the walls, working its way through the whole cabin. I lay there, on the old couch with my sleeping bag pulled up to my chin, listening to whatever it was scratch and scramble behind the plaster. The sound would stop for maybe 10 minutes, then start up somewhere else. Kitchen again, then the wall by the fireplace, then right above my head. Definitely not mice. Too big. too deliberate. I thought about raccoons. They've got those little hands, right? Could probably squeeze into tight spaces if they really wanted to. But raccoons don't usually get inside walls. They're more about attics and garbage cans. The scratching went on for hours. Every time I started drifting off, it'd start again somewhere new. Like whatever it was knew I was trying to sleep and didn't want me to. Around 4 a.m, it finally stopped. I woke up Monday with a crick in my neck and that groggy feeling you get from bad sleep. The cabin felt different in daylight. Quieter. Normal. I made instant coffee with bottled water and walked through the place again, looking for signs of whatever had been making all that noise. No obvious holes in the walls, no droppings on the floor, nothing chewed up or disturbed. That's when I noticed the kitchen door. It was standing wide open, not just unlocked, open. I stared at it for probably 30 seconds before my brain caught up. I'd locked that door. I was absolutely sure I'd locked it. I'd checked it twice before settling down on the couch because I'm paranoid about that stuff when I'm somewhere new. The brass deadbolt was turned all the way to the unlocked position. The door handle too. Both of them. My first thought was that I'd screwed up somehow. Maybe I thought I'd locked it but didn't actually turn the deadbolt all the way. That happens sometimes when you're tired. But I remembered the sound it made, that solid click when the bolt slid home. I remembered testing the handle afterward to make sure it didn't turn. I walked over and examined the door frame. No scratches around the lock, no damage to the wood. If someone had forced it, there would have been marks. Then I looked down at the threshold. Fresh tracks, leading from the open doorway toward the basement stairs. They weren't deer tracks. I know deer tracks from helping my dad with his hunting when I was a kid. These were smaller, rounder, with what looked like finger marks. Like someone had walked through on their hands and knees. Or something had. The tracks were pressed into the thin layer of dust on the hardwood floor. 4 or 5 clear prints, then they faded out where the wood was cleaner, near the stairs. But I could see the pattern. Front paws or hands with distinct finger impressions. Back feet that looked almost human. I followed them to the basement door. It was closed, but when I tried the handle, it turned easily. Unlocked. I didn't go down there. Not right then. I stood at the top of the stairs looking into that dark basement and decided I needed more coffee first. Maybe some actual breakfast. The scratching started again around noon. I was upstairs going through more of Sage's stuff when I heard it. Same sound as the night before, but louder, more aggressive, like whatever it was had gotten frustrated. This time I paid attention to where it was coming from. Started in the wall behind the kitchen sink, then moved along what had to be the plumbing chase toward the back of the cabin, then up into the ceiling. I stood in the middle of the living room, turning my head to follow the sound as it traveled overhead, from the kitchen toward the front door, then back again. Then it stopped. I waited, counted to 60. Nothing. I walked into the kitchen and the scratching started up again immediately, right in the wall next to where I was standing. I stepped back into the living room. The scratching moved with me. That's when I figured out what was really happening. Whatever was in the walls wasn't just wandering around randomly. It was tracking me, following my movements from inside the cabin. I tested it, walked from room to room, stopping in different spots. Every time the scratching would start up in the wall closest to where I was standing. Sometimes it took a few seconds, like the thing had to figure out where I'd gone. But it always found me. When I went upstairs, the scratching moved up too. When I came back down, it followed. By late afternoon, I was getting seriously freaked out. This wasn't mice or raccoons or any normal animal behavior. This was something that understood where I was and wanted me to know it was there. I tried ignoring it, went out to the porch and sat in one of Sage's old chairs, looking out at the lake. The scratching stopped while I was outside, but the second I walked back in, it started up again. I'd been planning to stay another night, maybe finish going through the upstairs bedrooms, but sitting there listening to something scratch its way through the walls while tracking my every move, I realized I was in over my head. I needed to talk to someone who knew this area. Someone who might have known Sage, or at least heard stories about weird stuff happening around Bear Lake. I needed help figuring out what the hell was living in my aunt's cabin. I remembered Craig McCarthy from when Stevie Jimenez gave me directions. She'd mentioned him as the closest neighbor, 2 miles down the mountain road, said he'd lived there for decades and knew Sage pretty well. Figured he might have some idea what I was dealing with. Problem was, I didn't have his number, no phone book either. But I remembered seeing a mailbox with McCarthy painted on it when I'd driven up Friday. Couldn't miss it. Bright blue mailbox on a wooden post sitting at the end of a gravel driveway that curved back into the trees. I grabbed my keys around 4:30 and drove back down Timber Creek Road. The Honda scraped bottom twice in the same spots as before. Really needed to get that looked at when I got home. Craig's place sat about a 1/4 mile back from the road. Single-story house with a metal roof, same era as the other places I'd seen up here. Probably built in the 50s or 60s. Had a big woodshed out back and what looked like a vegetable garden off to one side. 2 pickup trucks in the driveway, an old Ford and a newer Chevy. I parked behind the Chevy and walked up to the front door. No doorbell, just a screen door with a wooden door behind it. I knocked on the frame. "Just a minute," someone called from inside. The guy who answered looked like what you'd expect from someone who'd lived in the mountains for 40 years, maybe mid-60s, silver hair, weathered hands, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. Kind of guy who probably built half the stuff on his property himself. "You must be Mason," he said before I could introduce myself. "Stevie mentioned you'd be coming up to look at Sage's place." "That's right. Craig McCarthy?" "That's me." He pushed the screen door open. "How's it going up there? Everything in decent shape?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." I glanced back toward the road. "I'm having some issues with the property. Wondering if you might know anything that could help." Craig's expression shifted a little. Not suspicious exactly, but more focused. "What kind of issues?" "Something's living in the cabin. In the walls, I think. Been making noise all night and most of today, following me around when I move from room to room." He was quiet for a few seconds. "You staying there overnight?" "Yeah, slept on the couch last night." I rubbed my neck. Still had a crick from the old cushions. Didn't get much sleep, to be honest. "I can imagine." Craig stepped out onto his porch and closed the door behind him. "Mind if I take a ride up there with you? Have a look around?" "That'd be great, actually." He grabbed a jacket from a hook by the door. "I'll follow you up in my truck." The drive back took about 10 minutes. Craig stayed right behind me the whole way, which made me feel better somehow. Having another person around, even just following in another vehicle, made the whole situation seem less overwhelming. We parked next to each other by the cabin. Craig climbed out of his truck and looked around for a minute, taking in the property like he hadn't seen it in a while. "Been a few months since I was up here," he said. "Sage didn't really encourage visitors toward the end. I led him up to the front door and unlocked it. Soon as we stepped inside, Craig stopped dead. "Basement door's open," he said. I looked over. The door I'd found closed but unlocked that morning was now standing about 6 inches ajar. I didn't leave it like that. Craig walked over and examined the door without touching it. Then he crouched down and studied the floor around the opening. "These the tracks you mentioned?" "Yeah, found those this morning too." He spent a good minute looking at the prints in the dust. Didn't say anything, just traced the air above them with his finger like he was measuring something. "Craig, you recognize these tracks?" He stood up slowly. "Let's sit outside for a minute. Got some things to tell you about Sage that might help explain what's going on here." We went back out to the porch and sat in the old wooden chairs. Craig pulled out a pack of cigarettes and lit one, which surprised me a little. Didn't seem like the smoking type. "Sage was a good neighbor for a lot of years," he said. "Quiet, kept to herself mostly, but always willing to help if you needed something. Had a garden, did some fishing, normal mountain living. I waited for him to continue. But something changed about 10, 12 years ago. She started hunting every season. And I mean really hunting. Bringing home deer consistently, year after year. Which wouldn't be unusual except for two things. Craig took a drag from his cigarette. First, Sage barely ate meat. I'd see her at the grocery store in town sometimes, buying vegetables and pasta and such. Never saw her buy a single piece of meat the whole time I knew her. So what was she doing with all the deer? That's the second thing. She wouldn't accept help processing them. Most folks around here, we help each other out with that kind of work. It's a lot for one person, especially someone Sage's age. But she'd always say no thanks. She had it handled. The scratching started up again inside the cabin. Soft at first, then getting louder. Craig heard it too. I could tell by the way he glanced toward the front door. "How long has that been going on?" he asked. "Since last night. Starts up whenever I'm inside, follows me around from room to room." Craig nodded like this made sense somehow. "There's something else you should know about Sage. Something that happened a long time ago that probably explains why she ended up the way she did." He finished his cigarette and dropped it into an old coffee can sitting by his chair. Apparently, Sage had used the can as an ashtray. Back in 1998, Sage had her nephew visiting for the weekend. Boy named Jerome Vega. He was 12 years old, part of some Boy Scout group that was doing a camping trip in the area. I remembered the name from the inheritance paperwork. Jerome had been listed as next of kin, but Stevie said they couldn't locate him. Jerome went missing during that camping trip, Craig continued. Just vanished one night from the organized campsite. They had professional search teams up here for weeks. State police, Forest Service, volunteers from 3 counties. Never found so much as a piece of clothing. The scratching inside the cabin got louder, like whatever was making it had moved closer to the front wall. Sage blamed herself for what happened, Craig said. She was supposed to be supervising the boy that weekend, but she'd let him go off with the scout group instead of keeping him at the cabin. Figured it'd be good for him to spend time with kids his own age. I could see where this was heading, but I didn't want to interrupt. After Jerome disappeared, Sage just changed. Stopped socializing, stopped accepting help with anything. Started spending more and more time alone up here. And then the hunting started. Craig looked toward the cabin again. Always wondered what she was really doing with all that meat. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I didn't like the picture they were forming. "You think Jerome's still alive?" Craig was quiet for a long moment. I think Sage thought he was alive. Whether that's the same thing or not, I couldn't tell you. Tuesday night was when I realized I couldn't keep pretending this was just some weird animal thing. I'd been lying on that couch for maybe 2 hours when the scratching started up again, but this time it wasn't just scratching. There was this thumping coming from underneath me. Deep, rhythmic thumping, like something hitting the basement ceiling from below. I tried to ignore it, pulled the sleeping bag over my head and everything, but the thumping got louder, more insistent, and the scratching was moving faster now, like whatever was in there was getting worked up about something. That was it. I couldn't just lie there anymore. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. My hands were shaking a little when I clicked it on, which bugged me. I'm not usually the jumpy type, but something about the way those sounds were getting more aggressive made my skin crawl. The basement door was still cracked open from when Craig and I had looked at it earlier. I pushed it wider and started down the wooden steps. They creaked under my weight, which probably wasn't helping my nerves. Each step down made the thumping sound clearer, louder. The basement was bigger than I'd thought when I first poked around down there. My phone light swept across the concrete floor, and I could see the layout better now. Along the far wall, there were these industrial freezers. 3 of them, all unplugged. Big commercial units that looked like they belonged in a restaurant or something. I figured Sage used them for processing deer. Made sense with all the hunting she did. The freezers were empty when I checked. Clean, too, which surprised me. No bloodstains or anything gross. Just spotless metal interiors that reflected my phone light back at me. I wondered when she'd clean them out. Before she went to the nursing home, probably. But here's the thing I missed the first time I was down there. Behind the freezers, pushed back against the concrete wall, there was another door. Not just any door either. This was heavy steel, painted dark green, with 3 deadbolts running down the side. Industrial deadbolts, the kind you see on bank vaults or something. And there was this metal plate bolted over, where a regular door handle would be. The thumping was coming from behind that door. I stood there staring at it for maybe 10 minutes. The sound was definitely coming from the other side, something hitting the door over and over. Not random hitting either. It had a pattern to it. 3 quick thumps, pause, 3 more thumps. Like knocking. That's when I decided I needed some serious tools. Wednesday morning, I drove back down the mountain to town. There was a hardware store called Brennan's on Main Street that I'd noticed driving through. Big red sign out front, parking lot full of pickup trucks. Inside, it had that smell all hardware stores have. Oil and metal and sawdust. Narrow aisles packed with stuff hanging from pegboard walls. The kind of place where you can find anything if you know where to look. The guy behind the counter was maybe 45. Friendly face. Wearing a polo shirt with Brennan's hardware embroidered on it. Name tag said Eddie Rush, manager. "Help you find something?" he asked when I walked up. "I need bolt cutters," I said. "Heavy-duty ones." Eddie nodded like people asked for bolt cutters every day. "What size are you looking to cut?" I thought about those deadbolts. Maybe 1/2-inch steel, something pretty thick. He led me to an aisle near the back where they had the serious tools, pointed to a set of bolt cutters hanging on the wall that looked like they could cut through a car bumper. "These'll handle anything up to 5/8 inch, Eddie said, lifting them down. "What kind of project you working on?" "Cleaning out an old property," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. Previous owner left some stuff secured that I need to get into. Eddie rang me up without any more questions. $123 for the bolt cutters. I paid cash and carried them out to the Honda. Back at the cabin, I sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside. Those bolt cutters felt heavy in my hands. Once I used them on those deadbolts, there'd be no going back. Whatever was behind that steel door would be my problem. But I had to know. The not knowing was driving me crazy. I went inside and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. I hadn't really gone through Sage's bedroom yet, just poked my head in and seen it was pretty basic. Double bed with a quilt, dresser, nightstand. On the nightstand was a leather notebook I hadn't noticed before. Brown leather, worn at the edges like it got handled a lot. I picked it up and flipped it open. Hunting journal, page after page of entries in Sage's handwriting, dates, locations, what she shot. Pretty standard stuff for a hunter. October 15th, 1996. 8-point buck, North Ridge, clean shot. November 3rd, 1996. Doe, near the old logging road. Good meat. December 1st, 1996. Nothing today. Tracks but no clear shot. Normal hunting records. The kind any serious hunter might keep. But then I got to 1998. The entries changed. October 20th, 1998. He's still hungry. That was it. No location, no details about what she shot. Just that one line. November 2nd, 1998. I have to feed him. November 15th, 1998. He's still hungry. December 1st, 1998. I have to feed him. Page after page of the same 2 phrases over and over. Years of them. He's still hungry. I have to feed him. Sometimes there'd be dates with nothing written, like she'd gone hunting but couldn't bring herself to write anything down. I flipped to the very last entry. Recent, from just before she went into the nursing home. The handwriting was shakier, like her hands weren't steady anymore. But the words were clear enough. I can't do this anymore. He's getting stronger, and I'm getting weaker. Whoever finds this needs to know. Don't let him out. Whatever you do, don't let Jerome out. I kept flipping through Sage's journal after I found that entry about not letting Jerome out. The handwriting got shakier as I went, like her hands weren't working right anymore. Most of the pages toward the end were blank. But there was one more entry I almost missed, tucked between two empty pages near the back. The date was 3 months before Sage died. Just 5 words in that same shaky writing. Jerome needs fresh meat. The old meat isn't enough anymore. That was it. No explanation, no details, just that one line that made my stomach drop about 6 inches. I sat there on Sage's bed, holding the journal and thinking about those 3 freezers downstairs. All spotless. All empty. Like someone had cleaned them out real careful before they left. And I thought about what Craig said, how Sage hunted every season for years but barely ate meat. Where'd all those deer go? I figured I knew where. The bolt cutters were still sitting by the front door where I'd left them that morning. Heavy things. My hands felt weird carrying them downstairs, like I was about to do something I couldn't take back, which I probably was. The basement felt colder than before. Maybe that was just me. The thumping from behind the steel door had stopped sometime while I was reading upstairs, but I could hear something moving around in there, quiet scraping sounds. Not urgent, like before. More like waiting. The first deadbolt cut through easy. The bolt cutters went through that half-inch steel like it was aluminum, made a sharp crack sound that echoed off the concrete walls. The second lock took a little more pressure, but it snapped clean too. The third one was positioned lower, near where a normal door handle would be. I had to crouch down to get the right angle. When that last bolt fell to the floor, the scraping sound stopped completely. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes just staring at that green door. My heart was doing this weird flutter thing. Part of me wanted to turn around and drive straight back to the city. Forget the inheritance. Forget the money. Just leave and never think about Bear Lake again. But I couldn't. I needed to know. The door swung inward when I pushed it. Heavy, probably weighed 200 pounds with all that steel reinforcement. The hinges squeaked like they hadn't moved in months. The smell hit me first. Not decomposition, exactly. More like a zoo cage that hadn't been cleaned in a while. Animal musk mixed with something else I couldn't place. My phone's flashlight showed a concrete room about 10 feet square. The walls were covered in scratch marks, deep ones. Some went all the way down to the rebar. 25 years of scratching, by the look of it. The ceiling had marks too, like whatever was in here could reach that high when it wanted to. The floor was concrete, but it had this slight slope toward a drain in the center. Made sense. Easier to hose things down that way. Bones were scattered everywhere. Most of them looked like deer. Leg bones, ribs, skulls with those empty eye sockets staring up at nothing. But mixed in with the deer remains were smaller bones. Delicate ones. The kind that definitely didn't come from any deer. Human finger bones. I was pretty sure that's what I was looking at. And what looked like part of a child's skull cracked down one side. My hands started shaking. I almost dropped the phone. In the far corner, there was a pile of rotted fabric and metal. Took me a second to realize what I was seeing. A backpack. Dark green, or it had been once. The fabric was falling apart, but I could still make out a patch sewn on the front. Yellow border with a green tree in the middle. Boy Scout troop patch. Next to the backpack were clothes. Small ones. A t-shirt that might have been blue originally. Shorts with an elastic waistband. The kind of stuff a 12-year-old would wear to summer camp. Jerome Vega's clothes. Had to be. I backed out of that room and slammed the door shut. Didn't matter that the locks were cut. I just needed that barrier between me and what I'd seen. The rest of the day passed in this weird haze. I sat on the porch mostly, staring at the lake and trying to process what I'd found. Every now and then, I'd think maybe I was wrong. Maybe those weren't human bones. Maybe that wasn't Jerome's camping gear. But I knew better. Sage had been feeding her nephew for 25 years, keeping him alive in a concrete cell. And from what that journal entry said, Jerome was getting hungry for something fresher than the deer meat Sage had been bringing him. That night, the scratching stopped completely. I'd gotten used to it over the past couple days. The constant sound of fingernails, or claws, I guess, scraping through the walls, following me around the cabin like some kind of demented pet. But Wednesday night, nothing. Complete silence, which somehow felt worse. I was lying on the couch around midnight when I heard footsteps on the roof. Not scratching this time, actual footsteps. Slow and deliberate, starting above the kitchen and moving toward the front of the cabin. The old metal roof creaked with each step. Then something heavy landed on the front porch, right outside the door. The whole cabin shook a little. I held my breath and listened. More footsteps, but these were on the porch boards now. Slow, careful, like whatever was out there was testing each step. The door handle turned, real slow. I watched it from the couch as that brass knob rotated maybe a quarter turn clockwise. Then it stopped. Tried the other direction. The deadbolts I'd installed that afternoon held, but I could hear pressure against the door. Testing. That's when the snarling started. Not like any animal I'd ever heard. Too low for a dog, too rough for a human. It came from right outside the door, maybe 6 inches away from where I was sitting. Then came the first impact. The whole door frame shook. Something was throwing itself against the wood barrier with serious force, again and again. The deadbolts held, but I could hear the frame starting to creak. Between impacts, there was this scratching sound, but not fingernails this time. These were claws, real ones, raking down the outside of the door like they were trying to dig through 6 inches of solid oak. I crept toward the front window, staying low. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap near the bottom where I could see out to the porch. Moonlight was coming through the trees, making everything silver and black. At first I didn't see anything, just the empty porch and my Honda parked in the driveway. Then something moved past the window. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, but wrong somehow. The proportions were off, arms too long, fingers that stretched into points. It moved in this jerky way, like its joints didn't work quite right anymore. When it turned toward the window, I saw its face. Or what used to be a face. The basic structure was still human. Eyes, nose, mouth in the right places. But everything was stretched and wrong. The eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. The mouth was full of teeth that looked way too sharp. It stared right at the window. Right at me. I don't think it could see me through the curtains, but it knew I was there. Those reflecting eyes stayed fixed on my position for maybe 10 seconds. Then it opened its mouth and made that snarling sound again. That's when I knew for sure. This thing moving around on my porch used to be Jerome Vega, Sage's 12-year-old nephew who'd disappeared 25 years ago, and he was hungry. I sat back on the couch and tried to process what 25 years of that concrete cell would do to a kid. Raw deer meat, total darkness most of the time, no human contact except when Sage shoved food through that door. No conversation, no books, no toys, no windows. Just scratching at concrete walls until your fingernails turned into claws. The thing kept circling the cabin. I could hear it testing the kitchen windows, rattling the back door handle, walking along the foundation, probably looking for loose boards or gaps in the skirting, smart enough to be methodical about it. Around 3 a.m, it tried the front door again. Same violent impacts against the oak. Same snarling when the deadbolts held. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was just tired. This wasn't some monster from a movie. This was what happened when you lock a 12-year-old in a basement for 25 years and feed him nothing but raw meat. The attack stopped around dawn. I heard heavy footsteps cross the metal roof one more time, then a thud as it jumped down somewhere behind the cabin. After that, nothing. I made instant coffee with bottled water and sat on the front porch as the sun came up over Bear Lake. The scratches on my door looked deep. 3 parallel gouges in the oak, like someone had taken a garden rake to it. I figured it was hiding in the forest somewhere. Probably had a den or cave it used during daylight hours. But it'd be back tonight. And every night after that. I couldn't call the police. "Hey, officer, my dead aunt was keeping her transformed nephew in the basement and feeding him deer for 25 years, but now he's loose and trying to eat me." Yeah, that'd go over real well. I couldn't just leave either. There were hiking trails all around Bear Lake, campsites, families with kids who came up here for vacation. If I walked away and that thing got hungry enough to expand its hunting range. I sat there, drinking my coffee, and thinking about Sage. How she'd lived with this for decades. Every few days, she'd have to grab her rifle and go kill something, drag it back to the cabin, cut it up, feed the thing that used to be her nephew. No wonder she'd stopped socializing. No wonder she'd refused help from Craig. How do you explain why you're hunting constantly but never eating meat? Why you won't let anyone come inside your house? Why you can't ever leave for more than a day or two? The coffee tasted like dirt, but I kept drinking it anyway. I thought about my apartment back in the city, my temp jobs, my student loans, the life I'd been planning to build with the money from selling this place. That was done now. I couldn't sell a property with Jerome in the basement, couldn't hand this problem off to some unsuspecting family from Albany who just wanted a nice lake house, which meant I was stuck here, same as Sage had been. I went back inside and found her hunting rifle in the bedroom closet, a 30-06 with a decent scope, box of ammunition on the shelf next to it. I'd done some hunting in high school with my dad, so I knew enough to check that it was clean and functional. The sun was setting by the time I loaded the rifle and walked into the forest behind the cabin. I didn't know much about tracking, but I figured deer would be near water this time of day. I followed a game trail that led toward a creek about half a mile from the cabin, moved slow and tried to stay quiet, found a decent spot behind a fallen log and waited. Took about 2 hours before a young buck came down to drink. Not huge, but big enough. I lined up the shot and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kick reminded me why I'd never been that into hunting. But the deer dropped clean. Dragging it back to the cabin was the hard part. 150 pounds of dead weight through thick forest. Had to stop and rest every 50 yards. My back was screaming by the time I got to the basement. I opened that green door and shoved the deer inside. Didn't look around at the scratch marks or the scattered bones. Just got the meat in there and slammed the door shut. Went upstairs and called my landlord. Told him I wouldn't be renewing my lease. Called the temp agency and said I was moving out of state for family reasons. That part wasn't really a lie. I moved up here permanent about 2 weeks later, brought my clothes and my laptop and not much else. Set up in one of the upstairs bedrooms, got the electricity turned back on, fixed the front door and installed better locks on all the windows. The hunting got easier after the first few times. I learned where the deer liked to drink and which trails they used. Bought a small freezer for the kitchen so I could stockpile meat when I got lucky. Every 3 or 4 days, I'd take something down to that concrete room. Sometimes a whole deer if I'd gotten a clean kill. Sometimes just quarters if I'd had to butcher it first. The thing never showed itself when I opened the door. Just stayed back in the shadows while I shoved the meat inside. But I could hear it breathing. Could see its eyes reflecting my flashlight beam from the far corner. It stopped trying to break into the main cabin after the first week. I think it figured out that the food would keep coming as long as it stayed put. We had an understanding, I guess. I fed it, and it didn't try to claw its way upstairs to eat me. Not exactly a friendship. The thing that used to be Jerome Vega didn't trust me. Probably never would. But it wasn't stupid either. It knew which side of the arrangement kept it fed. Some nights I'd hear it moving around down there, scratching at the walls or pacing back and forth. But it never tried the door, never tested the locks. As long as the meat kept coming, it seemed content to stay in its concrete cell. That was 6 months ago now. I've gotten pretty good at living up here. Better at hunting than I ever thought I'd be. The isolation doesn't bother me as much as I figured it would. Craig stops by sometimes to check on me, bring supplies from town, and make sure I'm doing okay. He's never asked about the hunting, but I think he knows what I'm doing. Same thing Sage did for 25 years. Same thing I'll probably be doing for the rest of my life.